Hello, everyone. After leaving a voicemail for my wife, Sandra, whom I'd been married to for 5 years, I glanced at my phone one last time. I had just closed a massive service deal with a prominent company in California, one with offices all over the country. I knew my boss, Victor Hunt, would be ecstatic. This contract wasn't just a win for our IT firm. It also meant a significant boost to my salary. Maybe now Sandra and I could finally start the family we'd been dreaming about. But something didn't sit right. Ever since I returned from a recent camping trip with Victor, Sandra hadn't been herself. She seemed distant, snapping at me over trivial things, and her mood swings were impossible to ignore. It wasn't just her behavior, though. The day I got back, I was tossing some laundry into the wash when I noticed something unusual on her underwear. It had a strange texture and an overpowering scent that made my stomach drop. The realization hit me like a freight train, and my entire world felt like it was starting to crumble. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to consult a lawyer before heading back to the West Coast. If Sandra had betrayed me, there would be no going back. I reached out to Susan Hammond, a family law and divorce attorney recommended by a friend who'd recently endured a messy breakup. When I laid out my suspicions, Susan leaned forward and asked, "Are you sure Sandra's cheating on you?" "Not completely," I admitted, "but I need to know. If she is, I want a divorce." "California divorces don't typically assign fault," Susan explained. "If you're pursuing infidelity as grounds, you'll need solid evidence, photos, videos, that sort of thing." "What exactly would I need?" I asked, feeling a pit form in my stomach. "A private investigator can get you the proof," she offered. I nodded, and Susan arranged for Alan Simmons, an investigator she worked with, to handle the case. "Since you both make roughly the same income and don't have property or kids together, it should be a clean split," Susan added. "But if infidelity is confirmed, it could work in your favor." "Let's do it," I agreed, my voice grim. "I'll be gone for 3 days, so if something's going to happen, that'll be the time." Alan suggested installing a tracking app on Sandra's phone and provided a device to monitor our landline calls, along with a small audio recorder I could discreetly place in her purse. It felt invasive, but I had to know the truth. The days leading up to my trip were tense. Even Victor started acting strange, like he knew something I didn't, which only fed my unease. When the day came, Sandra drove me to the airport, kissed me goodbye, and I promised to call her that evening. When I did, she mentioned something unexpected. "Victor asked me to waitress at a party tonight. One of his regular servers canceled, and he's paying $150 for the shift." "Okay, but be careful," I said, trying to mask my suspicion. "Tell me about it tomorrow." "Sure," she replied casually. "You know I love you, right?" "I love you too, Sandra," I said, hanging up with a knot in my stomach. I immediately called Alan to let him know about her plans. "We'll keep an eye on her and update you," he assured me. The next day, I called Sandra's cell, but there was no answer. I tried the landline too, still nothing. Telling myself she couldn't have spent the night at Victor's, I pushed through the day until an email from Alan popped up. "Sandra spent the night at Victor's place and is still there," it read, accompanied by photos I'll never forget. She hadn't just been with Victor. There were 2 other men involved, men I once called friends. My hands trembled as I stared at the images, my breath coming in short, jagged bursts. I tried calling her again, but it went straight to voicemail. Frustrated and overwhelmed, I went down to the hotel bar, hoping to drown my anger. By morning, I checked the tracker on her phone. It was still at Victor's. Alan's follow-up email came with more pictures, this time showing Sandra in a large group that included Victor's son, Sam, and employees from Victor's IT team. There were even people I didn't recognize. With the contract signed, I packed up, checked out of the hotel, and took the earliest flight home. When I got there, Sandra's car was gone, so I went inside, changed clothes, and called Susan to schedule a meeting that afternoon. Sandra finally answered her phone, sounding slightly out of breath. "Hey, it's me," I said, working to keep my voice steady. "Where are you?" "I'm at home," she replied smoothly, "just wrapping up a few things before classes start." I clenched my jaw, biting back the frustration. "All right, well, I'm finished in California and heading home." "Oh, okay," she said, her tone softening. I miss you so much. Call me when you land, and I'll come pick you up. No need, I replied curtly. I'll grab a taxi. I hung up, knowing she'd noticed the shift. Normally, I'd end every call by telling her I loved her, but this time, I didn't. And my voice probably sounded colder than usual. Meanwhile, I imagined her staring at her phone, trying to figure out what was off. Little did she know, I already knew everything. I still love him, Sandra said, hesitating for a moment. Well, maybe I'll make sure he's away for another weekend, Victor suggested smoothly. Then you can come visit us again. Sandra smirked. It does sound fun, she admitted, but her expression turned serious. At some point, though, he's going to find out. David's not stupid. Victor shrugged and picked up a video camera from the table. Don't worry about David. I'll handle him, he said, his tone dismissive. But here's the deal. I don't want you with him anymore. You're ours now. Got it? She paused before muttering, all right, I'll figure something out. And just like that, Sandra morphed into someone I couldn't even recognize, soaking up attention from Victor's friends and colleagues like she was the star attraction at some twisted party. When I finally reviewed the evidence Alan had gathered, it hit me like a freight train. There were photos and even 2 DVDs showing Sandra with multiple men, doing things she'd never once done with me. Watching those videos felt like staring at a stranger, a version of her I'd never known existed. Susan tried her best to offer some reassurance, but it was clear there was no way forward. Why would she do this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper as I grappled with the betrayal. 5 years of marriage gone. And Victor? A man I'd once considered a friend. We'll move forward with the divorce and cite infidelity, Susan confirmed. I can also file a lawsuit for alienation of affection against Victor and the others. It might not go far, but it could lead to a decent settlement. Do whatever you need to, I said, my voice hollow. Susan gave me a warning look. Just keep it together, okay? Don't do anything rash. I won't, I assured her. But I'm done. I can't work for Victor anymore. I can't even be around him or those guys. I left her office and sat in my car for a while, scrolling through my contacts. When I landed on Hector Nelson's number, I hesitated for only a second before hitting dial. Hector was the CEO of Empire, a rival company that had tried recruiting me in the past. Nelson here, Hector answered. Hector, it's David. David Ford. David. It's been a while, he said warmly. How's everything going? Could be better, I admitted. That position you mentioned, is it still available? Of course, Hector said without hesitation. Have you decided to finally join a winning team? Something like that, I replied, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Let's just say I've realized I can't stay where I am anymore. I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can do? He asked, his tone sincere. Just give me the job, I said firmly. I'll bring everything I gave Victor, and more. Done, Hector said with confidence. Why don't you and Sandra come over for dinner tonight? Sylvia's making lasagna, and we can discuss the details. I'd love to, but I won't be bringing Sandra, I said, my voice hardening. There was a pause. Oh, Hector said cautiously. Is everything okay? I'd rather explain in person, I replied. Let's just say it's complicated. Understood, he said, concern lacing his tone. Well, Sylvia's also a certified counselor. If you need to talk, she'd be happy to help. That actually sounds great, I admitted, feeling a glimmer of gratitude. Come around 6:30, he suggested. I'll see you then, I said, ending the call and feeling the first sense of relief I'd had in days. I glanced at the clock. With the job offer secured, my next steps became clearer. Starting the car, I headed home, knowing Sandra wouldn't be there. Once inside, I showered, changed clothes, and began drafting my resignation letter. Around 5 o'clock, Sandra finally walked in. When she saw me at the computer, she came over to kiss me, but I turned my head, and her lips awkwardly landed on my cheek. Everything okay? She asked, her voice laced with concern. Not really, I said flatly. I'm not feeling great. Probably just jet lag. I'll sleep on the futon tonight. She frowned. Are you going out? Will you be back? I have dinner plans, I replied, avoiding her gaze. Her expression shifted. "Are you meeting a woman?" she asked, her voice tight. I let out a bitter laugh. "You think I'm cheating on you?" I shot back. "I've never cheated on you. Not once in all the years we've been together. Can you say the same?" Her face paled and she stammered, "Of course I can." She tried to change the subject. "How was the trip?" "Good," I replied curtly. "How was your little job at Victor's?" "It went well," she said, her eyes darting away for a second. "Even when it was tough, it was fun." "I bet," I muttered, glancing at my watch. "I should go." I saved my work, turned off the computer, and headed to the bedroom to change into something more formal. When I came back out, Sandra was still on the sofa. "How long will you be out?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Not sure." "Don't wait up," I said, heading for the door. She watched me leave, likely noticing that I didn't kiss her goodbye or tell her I loved her, something I'd always done. As soon as I pulled out of the driveway, Sandra picked up her phone and called Victor, unaware that every word was being recorded. "Victor, I think he knows something," she said, her voice trembling. "What makes you think that?" he asked coolly. "He hasn't touched me. Usually, he kisses me, tells me he loves me. But tonight, he was just cold. He said he had dinner plans, but he didn't mention with who," Sandra said, her voice tinged with unease. "So what if he knows?" Victor replied, his tone completely unconcerned. "You can always come stay with us. Don't worry about David. I'll make sure he's so busy he's hardly ever home." "But I don't want to lose him," Sandra insisted, her voice more desperate now. "I still love him." Victor let out a mocking laugh. "Yeah, sure you do. You've really shown us how much you love him these past few days, haven't you?" "Stop," she snapped, her voice sharp. "I know what I've done, and yes, I liked it. But that doesn't mean I want to lose David." Victor's tone turned cold and dismissive. "Look, just give him some time. He'll come around. And if he doesn't, we'll deal with it. You're ours now, and you're going to help us keep things running smoothly. You wouldn't want the school board seeing any of that footage, would you?" Her voice dropped to a horrified whisper. "You wouldn't dare." Victor sneered. "Oh, I'd love to. There's more than enough video of you in, let's say, compromising positions. So you'd better make sure little David plays nice." Her defeated sigh was the last thing I heard before the recording cut off. I clenched my jaw, struggling to suppress the wave of disgust churning inside me. By the time I pulled up in front of Hector and Sylvia Nelson's two-story house, I had managed to rein in my emotions. Grabbing the bottle of wine I'd picked up on the way, I rang the doorbell. Hector opened the door, greeting me with a welcoming smile. "David, thanks for bringing this," he said, taking the wine with a nod. "It'll pair perfectly with dinner. Come on in." He led me into the dining room, where Sylvia was setting the table. "David, meet my wife, Sylvia," Hector said. "Sylvia, this is David Ford, our new operations manager." "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Nelson," I said, shaking her hand. "Please, call me Sylvia," she replied warmly. "Mrs. Nelson sounds far too formal." We took our seats, and Sylvia served her homemade lasagna while Hector poured the wine. As I took my first bite, I couldn't help but praise her. "This is hands down the best lasagna I've ever had." "I'm so glad you like it," Sylvia said with a smile. "It's one of my favorite recipes." After a bit of small talk, Hector gave me a curious look. "So, David, what made you decide to leave Victor's firm so suddenly?" I hesitated, but then nodded. "It's a long story," I said, gathering my thoughts. Slowly, I began sharing everything with them. By the time I finished, Hector looked genuinely stunned. "Unbelievable," he said, shaking his head. "I'm so sorry, David. I've been through something similar. Not quite the same, but I know how hard it can be." "So, besides taking this job, what's next for you?" he asked. "I've filed for divorce," I admitted. "My lawyer says it should be a straightforward split, given the circumstances." Sylvia gave me a sympathetic look. "Have you thought about counseling?" I shook my head. "It's gone too far for that. I don't even recognize her anymore." "How are you holding up?" Sylvia asked gently. "Honestly, not great," I confessed. "My lawyer told me to act normal around her, but it's almost impossible. I can barely even look at her." Sylvia leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. Talking to a psychologist could help. I'd be happy to talk with you myself, if you're open to it. She's incredible at what she does, Hector added with a smile. She was a lifesaver for me when I hit a rough patch. I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. I'd appreciate that, Sylvia. Good man, Hector said, clapping me on the shoulder. Take whatever time you need. We'll work around your schedule. After dinner, Hector invited me to his office, where we discussed my new role over a glass of brandy. For the first time in days, I felt like I was taking back control of my life. By the time we wrapped up, I had a clearer vision of my future. I shook Hector's hand and thanked him before heading home. When I got back around 10 p.m., the house lights were still on. Stepping inside, I found Sandra sitting on the sofa. She looked up, her expression wary. "How did the meeting go?" she asked. "It went well, thanks," I replied curtly. "Now, if you don't mind, I'm heading to bed." I walked into the spare bedroom where I'd set up my computer and started undressing. A moment later, Sandra appeared in the doorway. "Are you sleeping in here now?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "I told you. I'm not feeling well," I said, brushing her off. "The futon," she pressed. "Fine," I muttered, clearly annoyed. She hesitated. "It's just, you were gone for a few days, and I thought maybe we could, you know?" "I'm not in the mood," I said coldly, the thought of touching her filling me with disgust. "Okay, maybe tomorrow," she whispered, almost pleading. I didn't answer, and she turned away, probably wondering if I knew anything. The next morning, I woke early, grabbed my resignation letter, and downloaded the audio of her phone call with Victor. Without a word to Sandra, I left the house. By the time I reached the office, I barely greeted anyone as I headed straight to my desk and started packing. It didn't take long for Victor to notice. He walked in, his expression confused. "What's going on?" he asked. I handed Victor 2 envelopes. One contained the signed contract from California. The other was my resignation letter. "I'm done," I said firmly. "Effective immediately. I expect my bonus, final paycheck, and any unused vacation pay." Victor's face paled. "Resignation? Are you serious?" he stammered. "Why are you leaving?" "Don't act like you don't know," I replied coldly. "I'm not an idiot, Victor. I can't work here anymore, so I'm moving on." "Wait, David, can we talk about this?" he pleaded. "There's nothing left to discuss," I said, barely holding back the anger rising within me. "I thought you were my friend, but you stabbed me in the back and destroyed my marriage." Victor scoffed, leaning against the desk. "Come on. It's not like I forced her." Sandra was more than willing. I froze, incredulous. "Is that really what you think?" I asked. "How long has this been going on?" Victor smirked, his arrogance on full display. "Since that camping trip. Remember the second day when you went skiing? She came to me practically begging. Even mentioned that I'm, let's just say, better than you." My blood boiled. "So that's why you made me leave that day? So you could have her all to yourself?" He didn't even bother denying it. "Why not?" he said smugly. "And hiring her as a waitress at the party? Just another opportunity for some fun?" I pulled out my phone and stopped the recording I'd started as soon as Victor walked into my office. "Thanks for your confession," I said coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm heading to HR." Victor's smug demeanor vanished. "Wait," he said, scrambling. "You can't use that recording." "We'll see about that," I replied, heading for the door. "Goodbye, Victor. I hope you rot in hell." I grabbed my things and walked out, feeling an unexpected sense of closure as I reached the door. Victor called after me one last time. "Hey, you forgot something?" he shouted, holding up a framed photo of Sandra that had been on my desk for years. "Keep it," I said without hesitation. "If you and your son want her so much, she's all yours." "I'm done." I walked out, leaving him standing there in stunned silence. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. It was Sandra, and she sounded frantic. "He resigned." I heard her exclaim, her panic clear. "What do you mean?" she demanded. Victor's voice was calm as he explained, "Yeah, he handed in a signed contract and a resignation letter. He knows. I don't know how, but he does." "What did you tell him?" Sandra asked, her voice thick with fear. "The truth," Victor replied casually. I told him about our time together during the hike. You idiot, she snapped, her voice breaking. What about the photo of me he kept on his desk? He didn't want it, Victor said with a chuckle. Told me to keep it. Guess he's really done with you. Sandra's voice cracked as she began to cry. So what do we do now? Victor's tone turned dismissive. Not my problem. He's your husband. You figure it out. Unless, of course, you want me to step in and make him see things our way. No, she whispered, her voice trembling. You've done enough. Just stay out of it. I'll handle it. Victor let out a mocking laugh. As you wish, he said before hanging up. When I pulled into my driveway, Sandra's car was parked outside. After ensuring Victor's car wasn't anywhere nearby, I grabbed my things and went inside. Sandra was sitting on the couch, her eyes red and puffy. Without a word, I headed to my home office, locked the door, and pulled up the recordings of her calls with Victor. Listening to her panicked attempts to explain herself to him left me feeling both vindicated and nauseated. I forwarded the files to Susan and called her. She picked up immediately. David, she said, I just got your email. I'm finalizing the documents now. When can they be submitted? I asked, eager to close this chapter. If you'd like, I can have them delivered later today, she replied. Perfect, I said, thanking her before hanging up. When I went into the kitchen, Sandra was still sitting there, avoiding my gaze. I set my briefcase down and looked her in the eye. We need to talk, I said, placing my old .45 revolver on the table within reach. Her eyes widened, and she flinched. Is that really necessary? She asked, staring at the gun. I hope not, I replied coldly. But if your lover decides to show up, I want to be ready. My lover, she stammered, looking genuinely shocked. Don't play dumb, Sandra. I'm not in the mood for games. I gestured to the chair across from me, and she sat down, trembling. Later today, someone will deliver papers for you, I said. Her face paled. Papers? You mean divorce? That's right, I said, my tone firm. I know everything about Victor, his son, and the others. I've filed on the grounds of infidelity. You don't have any proof, she blurted, desperation in her voice. Oh, don't I? I countered, pulling out an envelope. Inside were time-stamped photos of her with multiple men, including Victor. I also have video and audio. Would you like to watch? Her head dropped, realization washing over her. Fine, she whispered. Considering the circumstances, I'm being fair, I continued. No alimony, half of what's in the bank, and we keep our separate pensions. I've canceled your credit cards, and here's a cashier's check for your share of the remaining balance. There's also a restraining order requiring you to stay 500 feet away from me, my home, and my workplace. Tears streamed down her face. So you're kicking me out? Yes, I said. You'll have time to pack before the papers are served. What if I contest it? She asked, her voice shaking with desperation. I laughed bitterly. Do you really think that's a good idea? How do you think your school board would react if I sent them these photos and videos? Do you think parents would still want you teaching their kids? Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded. You wouldn't do that, would you? Are you willing to take that chance? I asked, my tone icy. She shook her head, defeated. Hand over your rings and plan to revert to your maiden name, I said. It's part of the deal. Sandra stared at me, stunned. You've become so cold, so heartless. I learned from the best, I replied. Just one question. What happened to you? How did you go from being a loving wife to this? She couldn't meet my gaze. It started on that camping trip, she murmured. You were out on the lake, and I was resting in the tent. Victor walked by and saw me undressed. He came in, and well, it just happened. So that's it? I asked, my voice dripping with contempt. Some guy walks in, and you're ready to throw away everything we had? Her voice cracked as she admitted, twice. It happened twice. Once when you were skiing and again when he sent you back to the office. I shook my head, disgusted. And none of them used protection? You weren't worried about getting pregnant or catching something? I'm on the pill, she muttered. Doesn't make it foolproof, I snapped. Did you even think about the risks? Or were you just that reckless? She covered her face, her voice barely audible. "Oh God, no." "You know," I said, my tone bitter, "I've had opportunities to cheat. Beautiful women, far more attractive than you. But I never did, because I thought I had a loyal wife." It hit me then. I'd been living in a fantasy. I pointed at the pile of bags Sandra had gathered. "Go pack. Anything you leave behind will be burned or donated." "Can't we try counseling?" she begged, her voice breaking. "Please, I'll change. I promise." I stared at her, feeling a cold numbness settle over me. "I'll never forgive you for this, Sandra. Not after everything you've done. Now pack your things. Whatever's left will be gone by tomorrow." Tears streamed down her face as she packed bag after bag, glancing at me one last time. "Can you at least help me carry these to the car?" she asked softly. "No," I said, unmoved. "It's your trash. You take it. And remember, if you leave anything behind, even that wedding dress, it'll be gone tomorrow." Her face crumpled. "My wedding dress? My parents spent thousands on that," she cried. "Then you'd better take it if it means that much to you," I replied, turning away as she carried bag after bag to her car. 2 hours later, she was exhausted. "I can't fit anything else in the car," she said, wiping her brow. "Can I come back for the rest?" "No," I replied firmly. "You can arrange for someone else to pick it up, but you're not stepping foot near this house. There's a restraining order in place." She gave me a weary, tearful look. "What am I supposed to tell my parents?" I shrugged. "Try the truth for a change. Tell them you cheated on me with my boss and a bunch of other guys." "If I tell them that, they'll disown me," she cried. "Not my problem," I said coldly. "But if you try to paint me as the bad guy, you know they'll find out the real story." Just then, there was a knock at the door. I glanced at her. "That's for you." Sandra opened the door to find a sheriff's deputy standing there. "Are you Sandra Ford?" he asked. She nodded, and he handed her an envelope. "You've been served. You're required to vacate the premises immediately." Tears streamed down her face as she signed the papers. Then she looked back at me, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Yeah, me too." "Goodbye, Sandra," I said. Without another word, she left, escorted by the deputy. The next few days passed in a blur. I didn't hear from her again, but Victor called twice, leaving threatening voicemails. "David, I know you're there," he barked in one. "Drop this lawsuit, or I swear I'll make you pay." I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Susan, who immediately involved the sheriff's department. Not long after, Sandra's parents, Martin and Janet, called to ask if they could pick up her remaining things. I agreed, but only under the condition that they ensure she stayed away from the house. When they arrived, Janet tried to talk me out of the divorce. "She just made a mistake," she said tearfully. "Surely you can forgive her." "What did she tell you?" I asked. "She said she had a fight with your boss," Janet replied, clearly confused. I sighed and pulled out the envelope of photos and DVDs, spreading them across the table. Their faces fell as they took in the evidence. "I'm sorry she didn't tell you the truth," I said. "It was much worse than she made it seem." "Oh, David," Janet whispered, horrified. "I had no idea." Martin's face turned bright red with anger. "I'm going to have a word with our daughter," he said, loading the last of her things. Before they left, they both hugged me tightly, clearly shaken. Later that evening, there was another knock at my door. Peering through the peephole, I saw Victor, his son Sam, and two of my former colleagues. My stomach sank. Quickly, I went to my office, grabbed my gun, and called 911. Keeping the weapon hidden behind my back, I opened the door just as they stormed inside, Victor leading the charge. "I'm going to teach you a lesson, you piece of," he snarled, stepping toward me menacingly. I pulled out my pistol and leveled it at him. The sight of the gun froze them in their tracks. "You really want to test me?" I asked, my voice steady. "Just so you know, I've already called the police. If you're still here when they arrive, you'll all be arrested for violating the restraining order." "Ah, Victor, I think he's serious," one of the men muttered, glancing nervously toward the flashing red and blue lights outside. "Yeah, Victor, I'm serious," I confirmed as the police sirens grew louder. They turned to leave, but it was too late. Two uniformed officers were already standing in the doorway. One officer stepped forward. "Put the weapon down, sir," he said firmly. I nodded, setting the gun on the kitchen table and raising my hands in compliance. "Officer," I said, nodding toward Victor and his friends. "These men violated a restraining order, broke into my home, and threatened me. I'd like them arrested." "Do you have a copy of the order?" the officer asked. I pulled an envelope from the kitchen drawer and handed it over. He studied it briefly before turning to the four men. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," he ordered. The officers cuffed them, reading them their rights. Victor glared at me, but I stayed silent, watching as they were led away. "Do you have a license for this firearm?" one of the officers asked. "Yes, officer," I replied, showing him my driver's license and firearm certification. He nodded, offering a word of caution. "Be careful with that." "Understood," I said. "Thank you, officer." As the police finally left, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Over the next 3 months, life slowly settled into a new routine. Working at Empire proved far more fulfilling than anything I'd experienced at Victor's firm. Sylvia's weekly counseling sessions helped me process the lingering anger and rebuild my trust in others. I even picked up new habits, hitting the gym 3 times a week, joining a martial arts class for discipline, and following a diet and fitness plan Sylvia recommended. The divorce itself went smoothly. Sandra didn't contest it. The alienation of affection lawsuit, however, was another story. While Susan warned me these cases were difficult, the publicity led to 2 defendants being fired. The case against Victor, though, stunned everyone. After reviewing testimony and the evidence Susan presented, including Victor's financial records, the judge ruled in my favor, awarding me a judgment of $1 million. At the end of the trial, the judge turned to Victor and delivered a verdict he wouldn't soon forget. "Mr. Hunt," the judge began, fixing Victor with a stern glare, "your conduct in this case is appalling. You betrayed a man who considered you a friend, used your position to destroy his marriage and personal life, and violated a restraining order multiple times. I find in favor of the plaintiff and order $1 million in damages." Victor's lawyer shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this ruling is highly unusual," he protested. The judge turned his icy gaze on him. "Not as unusual as your client's behavior," he said flatly. "If restitution is not paid immediately, Mr. Hunt will face jail time for contempt." Case closed. The gavel slammed down, signaling the end of the proceedings. Victor looked utterly defeated as he scribbled a check and handed it to his lawyer, who eventually passed it to Susan. To my surprise, the check cleared without issue, allowing me to pay Susan her share and secure my financial stability. As word of the lawsuit spread, several of Victor's clients reached out to me. They were unwilling to associate with someone who had so brazenly destroyed another man's life. With business drying up, it wasn't long before Victor was on the brink of bankruptcy. During this tumultuous time, I stayed away from dating. Even though a few women at work showed interest, I wanted to do things right. I was still technically married until the divorce was finalized. When that day finally came, I celebrated quietly with some friends from the office. A couple of months later, I received an unexpected call from Sandra's mother, Janet. "David, it's Janet. Do you have a moment?" she asked. "Of course, Janet," I replied, curious about the reason for her call. "It's Sandra," she said, her voice trembling. "She's HIV positive. She just got her test results." I sighed, not surprised by the revelation. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, "but honestly, I can't say I'm shocked. We're divorced now, Janet. There's nothing I can do." "I understand," she said softly, "but I was hoping you might speak to her. She's not handling this well." I hesitated, but eventually agreed. "All right, Janet. I'll come by for a few minutes." When I arrived, I was shocked by how much Sandra had changed. She looked frail and gaunt, a shadow of the woman I once knew. She tried to approach me, but I held up my hand, keeping my distance. Saddened, she sank onto the sofa and motioned for me to sit. "You look good, David," she said weakly, managing a sad smile. "Better than I remember. How have you been?" "I'm doing okay, Sandra. New job, new friends, new outlook. How about you?" "Not well," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You know I'm HIV positive now. Your mom told me, I said gently. I'm sorry to hear that. I think it happened during those days with Victor, she confessed, tears welling up. I was with multiple men, and none of them used protection. I nodded, letting her words sink in. Does Victor know? Not yet, she whispered, but I'll have to tell him soon. I shook my head, struggling to comprehend the tangled mess she was in. Well, I can't imagine he'll take it well. No, probably not, she agreed, her voice shaky. She looked down at her hands, then took a deep breath. David, I just want to say I'm sorry. I realize now how many lives I ruined. I had the best husband anyone could ask for, and I threw it all away. I know you probably hate me, and you have every right to, but I don't want to leave this world without knowing if you can forgive me. For the first time, I felt she truly understood the weight of her actions. Her regret was evident, and I remembered Sylvia's advice about forgiveness. Holding on to anger would only hold me back. All right, Sandra, I said after a long pause. I forgive you. Tears streamed down her face. Thank you, she whispered. That means more to me than you'll ever know. She composed herself and added, You deserve to be happy, David. Find someone to love, someone you can trust. Have a family and move on. I will, I said, appreciating the sentiment. And if you ever need someone to talk to, let me know. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Thank you for coming, David. I've missed you. I've missed the woman I married, I said softly. By the way, how are things with Victor and Sam? She shook her head. Not good. Victor's become even more abusive since the lawsuit, and his business is falling apart. He's been very harsh with me lately. Do you want me to be there when you tell him about your diagnosis? I offered. No, but thank you, she said. I need to do this alone. We said our goodbyes, and as I left, Janet hugged me tightly. Thank you, David. It meant the world to her, and to me. A couple of weeks later, I was eating dinner when a news report caught my attention. Local businessman and two others found dead in a suspected murder-suicide, the anchor announced. Victor Hunt, his son, and an unidentified woman were discovered with fatal gunshot wounds. Authorities are investigating and will release more details soon. I froze, my fork clattering onto my plate. Grabbing my phone, I dialed Janet. She answered, sobbing. Janet, I said urgently. I just saw the news. Was it? It was her, David, she choked out. Victor shot her, then his son, and finally himself. Oh my God, I whispered, overcome with a wave of sadness. I'm so sorry. I think she told him about her diagnosis, and he snapped, Janet said through tears. They're performing an autopsy now. I never wanted any of this, I said softly. I hope you know that. I do, David. Thank you for making peace with her. I like to think she's at peace now. I hope so, I said quietly. Let me know if there's anything I can do. At Sandra's memorial, I stood with her parents, paying my respects. The autopsy later confirmed that both Victor and Sam had been HIV positive as well. When Victor learned of their diagnoses, everything spiraled out of control. Sandra had tried to suggest they all get tested, but upon hearing the news, Victor snapped, taking her life, his son's, and then his own. The tragedy was senseless, and I spent the next few days reflecting on everything, mourning not just the loss of the woman I once loved, but also the life I thought we would share. The memories of our good years were a bittersweet reminder of what once was. One day, as I was leaving the office, Jessica, a coworker, stopped by. Hey David, she said with a warm smile. Would you like to join us for happy hour tonight? I figured you might need a little company. For a moment, I almost turned her down. Putting myself out there again felt foreign, daunting even. But then I thought about it. Life was moving forward, and maybe it was time I did too. What the hell? I said, smiling back at her. I could use some good company. Her smile widened. Great. See you at Hitchhikers after work. As she walked away, I leaned back in my chair, a strange but welcome sense of peace settling over me. Life goes on, and for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to embrace whatever came next. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel. Bye.